What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review Chapter 18 of Legion, aka Episode 10 of Season 2. Up front, I have to apologize for missing last week's recap and review, but I have two good excuses as to why I missed it. The first one is that my podcast, Wrong Reel, takes up the majority of my time in terms of preparation and editing and recording. So anytime I'm not making videos for this channel, usually I'm working on Wrong Reel, which you can find on iTunes or you can see in a link in the show notes below. But my other excuse for why I didn't post a review last week, I didn't really feel like I had that much to say about the previous episode. Not that I didn't enjoy it, but if I'm feeling fatigued and I feel like I'm grasping at straws for something to talk about a particular episode, usually that's a sign that I should not waste your time or mine just ranting and raving about nothing in particular. That said, that will not be a problem with tonight's episode because a whole hell of a lot of stuff went down, setting up next week's season finale very nicely. But also, more importantly, we got some nice news between the last episode and this episode. We're getting a season 3. We're not quite sure when it'll be or how many episodes it'll be. If you remember, season 1 was only 8 episodes. This season is 11. And I was actually genuinely surprised that FX wanted to continue with the show because the numbers for season 2 have been like a third of what they were for season 1. I believe I read somewhere that last week's episode got a little over 300,000 viewers, whereas the season finale of season 1 got like 950,000. I mean, season 1 was a massive success. But I think FX recognizes they have a unique show on their hands, a show that approaches the superhero genre unlike any other out there. And I think they want to be in the Noah Hawley business for a very long time, irrespective of what show he might be working on. Noah Hawley obviously did brilliant work with his 3 seasons of Fargo. There are rumors of a 4th. So it appears as if FX and Noah Hawley will continue to work together for at least the foreseeable future. But the episode began with an image that I found particularly exciting and hopefully a harbinger of things to come in the future. But initially, we just see Lenny lying on the ground amidst piles of human bones. But as the camera pushes in, we see David sitting on what appears to be a throne with his hair combed straight up, much like it is in the comics, and he's gazing into a crystal ball. The way I interpreted the shot is that this is David in the future when he's officially become Legion the World Killer. And I love how they refer to him as Legion the World Killer in this particular episode. While David's always been an interesting central character as an unreliable narrator in that he has a fractured mental state, we're never quite sure where he stands, but it appears as if the show's grooming him to become an all-powerful supervillain, and that would definitely be a first in the history of television to have a superhero show about a deranged, insane mutant living like a tyrannical overlord over the entire planet. If a show like that has ever been made, I'm not aware of it, but please let me know. And then for the rest of the episode, we see the events that perhaps set in motion this possible future. And that's one of the things I enjoyed most about this episode, is that it set up this idea of a possible time paradox. Does David become evil and deranged and psychotic because of the actions of the people around him trying to prevent a possible future? Or is that future set in stone and the people around him have no choice but to respond the way they do? But as powerful as David might be, what we see in this episode is that the Shadow King is a little bit better at what he does. And working through Melanie now, we see he sets this really interesting, elaborate trap for Sid. It's basically a giant hole out in the desert with this like bathtub drain stopper. And as Sid moves in to investigate, this little bunny rabbit gets thrown out with a hook through it. Of course, she moves in to help this wounded animal, but as she does so, another hook comes out, grabs her hand, pulls her down in the hole. And once she's down there, for the rest of the episode, Melanie's basically working on Sid, trying to turn her against David. Initially, Sid tries to resist. She calls out Melanie on being resentful over the fact that she no longer has Oliver in her life, and then basically that she's jealous that Sid still has David in her life. But Melanie raises an interesting point, and it's one that I find very true in life, that when you're trying to change someone's mind, no matter how many facts you might hurl their way, you're probably going to be unsuccessful. However, a story has enormous potential to persuade. So rather than arguing with Sid or trying to persuade her, she just starts presenting her with scenarios and images of what David has done in the past, present, and future. But what's sad is that the image that perhaps should have persuaded Sid that David is on her side is the one that actually really helps turn her against him. When David finds that Sid is missing, he enters the monastery where he finds Oliver. David launches into Oliver's head and proceeds to torture him with a drill in the leg for the rest of the episode, trying to get the information that he seeks. But it's not just the fact that David's torturing Oliver that really convinces Sid that something's dreadfully wrong. Melanie points out that David is on some level at least enjoying what he is doing. And Melanie reveals a couple of other scenarios where David was basically using his insanity as a mask to disguise the fact that on some level he enjoys hurting people. But the straw that breaks the camel's back is when Melanie shows Sid the fact that in the future it is in fact David, not Farouk, who brings about the end of the world and is the true threat. And I need some help on what this crippled minotaur creature is that we've been seeing. I love the idea of this minotaur in a maze because I grew up reading Greek mythology. I love the story of Theseus. I love the way he confronted the minotaur back in the day. But we have this interesting scene where Melanie approaches the crippled minotaur, tells it to kill the weak, and basically breathes strength and vitality back into its limbs where it's able to reach its full potential. And then finally we get the resolution of what the Shadow King has been working toward this entire season. Melanie approaches the burial chamber where the Shadow King's body has been hidden. She opens it up, she kisses him, and the Shadow King finally goes back into his true form. Melanie collapses in a heap at the floor. I'm not quite sure if she will regain control of her body or not, but it appears as if Oliver is probably back in control of his body. Although he's so crippled and incapacitated, he probably won't function very well either. But what I really enjoyed about this episode is that it managed to employ the majority of the characters in this show. We see Lenny arrive basically by teleportation in that car from the previous episode. And as the car bursts into flames, she grabs a few key items out of the trunk before marching off to do battle. The two Carries arrive with a bunch of soldiers from the Division 3, and they have this incredible battle scene with all these monks. And I love how the monks don't fight them really head on. They just swing these little things over their head, and if you hear it, it basically cripples you and makes you start vomiting horribly. But we get this badass action scene as the female Carrie whips out this quarterstaff and just beats 7 shades of shit out of them. And even as more monks pour out of the hole and grab the other Carrie and pull him down, Lenny arrives with her sniper rifle, takes a few out, which gives the warrior Carrie a chance to basically, almost like a little video game character, hop down the tunnel. It was really cool. It was almost like something out of like a Wes Anderson stop motion animation movie, the way she was hopping down. It probably should have thrown me out of the show, but it was so unusual and so striking. I actually really enjoyed it. The only thing I was really missing from this episode is one of those little short films narrated by John Hamm, but I totally understand that they're now rushing toward the climax of the show, but maybe we'll get a little taste of them at the end of the season next week. But the last person to arrive on the scene is Clark and a couple of the Vermilions, and he brings what looks like just a giant tuning fork, but it's actually a dampener. It's designed to shut down the power of mutants all around it. But obviously it doesn't work that well because the Shadow King, now that he's back in full power, he basically just strolls up, mops the floor with everybody, and with telekinetic power just chucks this dampener off into the horizon. So the Minotaur creature continues to go on a murderous rampage. We see him eating a monk. He rips apart a couple of the Vermilions. And while all this is going on, we get a brief scene where David talks to Carrie, and we get a glimpse of a side of David which suggests that perhaps all these ominous predictions about his future might be true, because he talks about all the different ways that he's planning on killing the Shadow King and how good it feels to think about that. And while we see David starting to kind of lean into the dark side a little bit, we see that Sid basically has a way of letting off a little steam, decides that she's in the mood to hit something, and decides to throw down with the Minotaur. I initially thought this must be how Sid loses her arm. We've obviously seen her without her arm many times in the future now, but in the teaser for the next episode, it appears as if both arms are still intact. In the fictional universe of Legion, I don't know if we're looking at a situation where the future is not set, where it's malleable. Obviously, depending on which fictional franchises you're talking about, there are different rules about time travel and changing the future. But something about Noah Hawley makes me believe that even if they do manage to change the future, it wouldn't actually rewrite the future. It probably would just create an alternate timeline. Perhaps that's what he was suggesting in one of those episodes a few episodes back, where we saw a million different versions of how David's life might possibly go. In any case, whatever happens next week will probably be filled with murder and mayhem, because the last shot of this episode is a pretty ominous close-up of David looking into the camera and just saying boo. Without the love and affection and loyalty of Sid to kind of keep him grounded, we very well might see David spiral off into total madness. I would like to believe that no matter what happens to David, Lenny will probably find him irresistible and want to be his wingman and be on his side. After her experiences of being dominated by the Shadow King as long as she was, something tells me that Lenny will never be on the Shadow King's side ever again. And also, we have that first shot from the opening of this episode to suggest that Lenny will at least be David's one big ally moving into the future. But if we go into Season 3 with a scenario where the Shadow King and the remains of Division 3, whoever survives, are going up against David and Lenny in this twisted dystopian future, count me in. However, as we've seen to date, Noah Hawley is a wildly unpredictable filmmaker, so I imagine whatever happens in Season 3 will be very difficult to predict before we see next week's episode. So as always, I appreciate you watching my recap and review. Please consider giving my channel a subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I'll be back tomorrow night to review the latest episode of The Expanse, something I'm very fired up to see. But as always, I really appreciate the support from my channel. Definitely let me know what you think of the show in the comments below, or if you want to reach me directly, just give me a shout on Twitter @Colbrax. So until next time, folks, onwards and upwards.